With that, I'll jump into the body of my remarks. And the first, or the only one we're going to deal with tonight, is what's called the Damascus Affair, which is a blood libel. It's a Alil Stam. In 1840, which made world headlines at that time. And it's a remarkable story, make a heck of a movie, set against a background of international politics and intrigue, and I mean that in the fullest sense of the word. The background of this, 1840, is the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, which once upon a time was huge, but by the time you get to the 1800s, especially the period we're talking about, was in decline. It used to call Turkey, you might remember this from your high school tests, the sick man of Europe. And that's because the Turkish Empire, very Islamic, was not up with the technology, and they didn't have the kind of culture that could keep up with the technology, and the only thing they could do was try to copy the technology coming out of Europe, and in the military field, it means the Turkish army is falling behind. You understand? Turks are very good soldiers, but they technologically fell behind. And so the result is they started losing territory right and left. And in the context of this, for our story, the big tale, and let's go to the first one over here, is the decline of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. The Sultan in Istanbul doesn't count so much. And one of his governors went into business for himself, Mehmed Ali over here, who was an Albanian, not an Arab. Albania, I don't know if you know this or not, is a Muslim country. The Turks moved a bunch of Muslims there long, long ago when the Turks conquered this back in the 1400s. This is one of the problems you have in Europe today with the ethnicities. And he was in the Turkish army. And perhaps you will recall that Napoleon, in one of his campaigns in 1799, conquered Egypt at a single blow, but then had to pull out because the British chased him out. And then the Turks sent an army to take Egypt back over again. And this guy was one of the officers, and he rose to the top through ruthlessness. He bumped off this guy and that guy. He did like Yehu in the Bible. He called all the Mamelukes into a party and killed them. Doesn't get better than that in the Arab culture. And he was an extremely capable ruler. Once he took over and killed everybody, then he ran the country very successfully and built Egypt into a modern state, or as close as you can get to it in the Islamic context in the 19th century. He was a great ruler, created modern Egypt, military, bureaucracy, civil service, canals, roads, trade, all those sorts of things. And he did it very simply by importing European specialists in all these fields, and you had to listen to him or else he'd kill you. So in other words, he got things done. And Egypt moved miles ahead in terms of its technological progress ahead of Turkey. And Egypt was supposed to be a province of Turkey. You already start to see that we have the Turkish Empire tottering, and this particular governor, who would be a much better sultan in terms of ability, just being confined to Egypt. So you understand where things are going over here. In this particular case, he was originally a governor under Turkey, of course, and he owed them official allegiance, and he conducted some very successful wars on their behalf. I'll just tell you one very interestingly. Here we're having trouble today with all the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. You had that at that time also, and the Turks didn't know what to do, and they sent them in. He wiped them out, okay, in 2 campaigns. So I'll say it again. He conquered Mecca and Medina and all this kind of stuff. Yes, with the Egyptian army, because they were trained by modern European officers and all this sort of thing, and he hanged the heads of the Wahhabis, and he put them back for a century. Now, so he was a very tough and capable type of individual, and he did a lot of favors. So you see the Turkish Empire over there, that's at its nominal length, which is quite large, but a lot of these provinces were semi-independent, as you can see, as the center, Istanbul, I don't have my laser pointer, but it's, if you maybe notice it where the Black Sea is, got weaker and weaker, and the provinces and sometimes got stronger. And what happened very specifically, I'll just go this for a minute. You see where Greece is? In the lower part? So Greece went for a war of independence against Turkey in the 1820s. That's where Lord Byron died. And the Turks couldn't stop the Greeks. The army was incompetent. And so they called in Mehmed Ali and his son, Ibrahim Pasha, we'll see, these are famous generals of the old days, and they crushed the Turks for a while. And in return, Mehmed Ali said like this, so what do I get out of this? I mean, I saved maybe the right, I can't say the word, I saved your bacon if it's a Turkish empire, but I saved your bacon for the Wahhabis and for this revolt and for the Greeks and the others. What do I get out of this? You understand? And the Turks kept promising him things like this, and they didn't pay off. And so the end is, he just seized Palestine and Syria in 1831, 1832. It's very famous. His son, who was a very great general, Ibrahim Pasha, well known in those days, he, very capable, he conquered in a war what we call today Eretz Yisrael and the whole Syria. And there are many Jewish accounts, by the way, of this era. And the Jews kind of looked up to Ibrahim Pasha because he brought in law and order. Before that, under the Turks, there was a lot of hefkeris, highway robbery, literally. The Druze used to run around and kill people. That's why you had to live in a walled city. When Ibrahim Pasha came in, it was law and order the old-fashioned way. You know, somebody commits a crime, you hang them and all their relatives. And so he put it down. And now it means that Egypt controls quite an area. It's Egypt plus Syria and Lebanon and Israel and Jordan today. And what's left for Turkey? You understand? Now, as Turkey totters, the great powers of Europe ponder what to do. The Tsar of Russia, Nicholas, Lord Palmerston, we'll see him in England, Prince Metternich. These are the great European statesmen, and they're looking over like, how do we share the flesh? You understand? They're all afraid that as Turkey totters, Russia will take it all over, which they could do. And so what began was called the Eastern Question, or the Great Game, in which it's balance of power politics, in which some people support Turkey, some people try to knock it out. Every time the Russians want to take it over, the British put a coalition together to block the Russians. Eventually, this led to a war called the Crimean War, in which Russia was defeated by the British. That's an important thing to remember, as you'll see in a minute. And the great statesman of that time, the 1830s and 40s, was indeed the Tsar of Russia. Lord Palmerston, who will become acquainted with quite well tonight, of England, and Metternich was the Austrian chancellor who ran all of Central Europe. Now, Palmerston was a heck of a guy. He was the foreign minister for 25 years under Queen Victoria and then the prime minister in the age when England ruled the roost, or they certainly ruled the oceans. No one had a navy even near them, and they knew it. And Palmerston was John Bull, they call it, you know. He says, if I feel like insulting you and knocking things you right, what are you going to do about it? You want to have a war? Let's have a war. And the other countries were afraid because England's crazy enough to go to war over something that's not even a national interest. Sometimes European countries traditionally don't go to war unless it's absolutely necessary. That's traditional. But England could do it at the drop of a hat, and Palmerston was the guy to do it. And when people called him a warmonger, he says, damn right I'm a warmonger. And the public cheered him, you see? So Queen Victoria didn't know what to do because he led a very, what shall I say, playboy type of life. And that wasn't Queen Victoria or Albert. But on the other hand, he was incredibly popular and very successful as the British leader over here. And here you have a classic story. Let's go to the next one. Read this. The British love that sort of thing, you understand? Yeah, the Frenchman says, if I was a Frenchman, I would like to be an Englishman. If I was an Englishman, I would like to be an Englishman. Meaning, he's pure English. They're God's gift to the earth. Obviously, God speaks English in heaven and all the rest of it. This is the time when the British Empire, the sun did not set on the British Empire, and they were ready to tell everybody where to get off. And the countries of Europe always had to reckon with this, and this guy had the control. He was the foreign secretary for decades, from one prime minister to another, and later he was the prime minister himself. So he was quite a guy. Now, in 1839, this very tempestuous decade that I just started, remember, the Egyptians seized Syria and Israel and Palestine in the 1830s. In 1839, Mehmed Ali of Egypt wanted to declare independence. He said, Genugschein, the Ottoman Empire is a joke. I'm something. I have a big army and all the rest of it. They're nothing. Let me go and say like this. All the money you owe me and all the rest of it, let's just do the following. I'll go independent, declare my own country. I'll cancel all the debts that you owe me and all the money, and I get to keep Syria and Palestine. The Ottoman Empire said no. And the Sultan sent an army. Ibrahim Pasha wiped it out at the Battle of Konya in the middle of Anatolia. So if you look at the arrow on the right there, and you see that, in other words, where that goes, where it says Konya, that's smack in the middle of the heart of Turkey. When he destroyed the Ottoman army there, he could go to Istanbul and take it all over. You understand? No one expected this. And that set off a European crisis. Okay? because will Muhammad Ali take over the Middle East? Will he back the Turkish Empire? What is Russia going to do about this? What's Austria going to? What's England and France going to do about this? As I said, it was the power politics of the old days. At that point, Britain and France send in the navies. All this is nogea to our story, as you'll see. And in other words, Palmerston sent the British fleet, the French sent their fleet in, which was no comparison. And Muhammad Ali was scared. And basically they said, like, don't take over Turkey or you'll mess with us. You see, he was afraid of the following. 12 years earlier, when he intervened in the Greek War, and he was wiping out the Greeks, he at great expense, for 10 years, he put together a huge navy, getting all the European officers to teach him how to do it. They had a big Egyptian navy, modern ships, and all that stuff. And it was superbly trained. And then, when the British said, maybe you should get out of Greece, he said, no, they wiped out the fleet. Sent the whole thing to the bottom. The Battle of Navarino. Okay? Which is a famous battle. In other words, the British said, you don't, you're minor leagues. You don't mess with the major leagues over here. And it was a very famous sort of thing. Incidentally, this is when Moses Montefiore first became famous, because he happened to be visiting Eretz Yisrael at this time and on his way back. And the very first time, we'll talk about him in a minute, when he and his wife Judith, in the 1820s, civilized Europeans didn't go to Palestine. It was disease, it was robbery, it was absolute lack of security. It was like Gaza or something, you know. And he went. You know, Montefiore was a millionaire. We'll talk about in a second, and he therefore hired special guards and all that sort of thing. He went to Hebron, by the way, in 1827, and they were going to beat him up. They tried to attack him, but he had Turkish guards that beat up the beater-uppers. It's quite a story. And he was on his way back to England, and meanwhile he's passing by. They just had the Battle of Navarino, and they wanted to get the news as quickly as possible in England. And Montefiore said, I'm on my way anyway. So the admiral gave him the news. So he had the zechus, if you want, that his ship was the first one to arrive in London and bring the news to the British government, which was a feather in his cap. So all we can say is that the British fleet, during the time I'm speaking about, remained somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, right off the coast of Akko and Lebanon and those kind of places. And everybody knows the British fleet is not something you mess with. In the midst of all this crisis and international intrigue, a French Catholic priest in Damascus disappears. He had been threatened a month earlier by a Muslim who called him a dog and said, I'll kill you as a dog. Father Thomas, the guy with the beard on the right. Anyway. So he was a French Catholic priest. At this time, there were a lot of European, what shall I say, Christian sects and groups that were represented in Syria and in Eretz Yisrael and in Palestine. After all, I don't have to tell you, that's where the New Testament takes place. There's a lot of churches and things like that. And who done it? What happened to him? Now, I just told you the real circumstantial evidence is the Muslim guy who didn't like him said, I'll get you, probably did it. But there's no body. The local French consul, so you understand, France has an ambassador in Istanbul, but in all the important cities, they have consuls, like smaller diplomats. The French consul in Damascus, which is an important city, is named Ulysses de Ratimonton. He's the worst type of French Catholic. In France, especially in the 1800s, and we're not finished with it today, there's always been a right and a left. And the left embraced the French Revolution, and the right thought the French Revolution was the worst thing ever happened. And the right, usually what they call the ultramontane super Catholics, which not today, but in the 1800s, very anti-Semitic. Okay? Now this guy maybe wasn't as bad as some of the others, but that's his social background. He's a buddy of the local governor of Damascus, who still governs for Muhammad Ali. So look how complicated this is. This disappearance happens in Damascus, which is, of course, is in Syria, which at that moment is occupied by the Egyptians, but it's claimed by the Turks. And the British have a fleet off the shore to enforce for the Egyptians to get out, the Turks should take back in. It's like Chag Gadya, okay? But by the way, I want to tell you something. It's nothing changed. If you go to somebody who's not following the Middle East and say, what's happening? You say, well, there's Hamas, and there's Gaza, and there's, you know it already. It would be a Chag Gadya to them. So anyway, in the midst of all this happens, and the British kind of want to kick Muhammad Ali out of there totally and might blow him up. The French want to keep him in for their personal reasons. And so the governor of Damascus is pro-French. And so when this French consul goes and says, what happened? A French national, a Catholic priest, disappeared. I think the Jews did it. And I want you to empower me to go back to the Middle Ages and arrest everybody and have a torture trial. The guys that go for it. You see? So we've seen here, many of you have been here in the previous lectures, you were never able to get a judicial verdict in favor of a blood libel without torture. The Russians tried it, remember the Bayless case, and other cases. You're not going to get a confession because it doesn't happen, you see? And so here, even though it's 1840, they'll suspend the rules because of the local peculiar situation. And so the Arab governor, the Egyptian governor, permits the French consul Ratim Anton to raid the Jewish quarter of Damascus to search for the corpse, unsuccessfully, to arrest a bunch of Jews and torture them into confessing. A confession was extorted by torture from a Jewish barber named Negrin. And 8 of the most notable Jews in Damascus, Yosef Lanyado, Abu Lafia, Rabbi Yaakov Antebi, who wrote Shalos and Tubas, and a member of the Farhi family, all were imprisoned and tortured. Their teeth and their beards were pulled out. They were burned and finally tempted with gold to persuade them to confess to an imaginary crime. Lanyado, a feeble old man, died under treatment. Moses Abu Lafia became a Muslim in order to escape the torture. You can't blame him. And in spite of the stoic courage displayed by the sufferers, the Arab governor, the Sharif Pasha, and Ratim Anton, the Frenchman, agreed to the trumped-up charges, meaning they got some of these guys to confess using what they call the bastinado. And that's a good old torture where you hang somebody up, take off the shoes, and you whack them on the feet over and over again with sticks and it hurts. So, in spite of the stoic courage displayed by the sufferers, they agreed, the Frenchman and the other guy, to the trumped-up charges that the Jews did in order to use the blood for matzah. When Ratim Anton published libels against the Jews in French and in Arabic, the Sharif Pasha, the governor, wrote to his master Mehmed Ali, the Egyptian ruler, demanding authorization to execute the murderers of Father Thomas. Because I told you the Egyptian regime was a law and order one, and therefore you can't kill somebody without getting permission from Cairo, from Alexandria. In the meantime, the Arabs, the population, fell upon the synagogue in the suburb of Jobar, known as the Big Shul in Damascus. They pillaged it, destroyed the Sefer Torahs. What else is new? This happened a couple weeks ago in Damascus, as you follow the news. When more confessions seemed to be required, 63 Jewish children were arrested and tortured to get their parents to confess. Think about that. You know, little kids, which they do in front of the parents. It's like, if you won't confess, I'll torture your child to death. So it's really rough. As it happened, the Austrian consul, not the French consul, the Austrian consul in Damascus was a Jew named Elio Pishato, a relative of one of the victims. That victim had the good fortune of being an Austrian citizen, because the Pishato family, which, by the way, some of them were in Philadelphia, and they were big machers in the administration of Ulysses S. Grant, believe it or not. They started the B'nai Bris in America. So they're obviously a Sephardic family, from the real Sephardic. And they're all over the place, and they were connected with Rothschild and things like this. So one of the guys they arrested happened to be a citizen of Austria, which meant that the Austrian government has the right to say what's going on over here. Not that the Austrian government is such tzaddikim when it comes to the Jews, but you know how it goes. To my Jews, I'm not saying, but to the Jews overseas, you insulted one of my friends, you see? And so Pishato quickly ran to Egypt, to Ibrahim Pasha, the son of Mehmed Ali, the famous guy. And Ibrahim Pasha, as I told you, was famous for stern law and order and justice. And Ibrahim Pasha ordered a full investigation. He said, if this is involving a foreign citizen, we got enough trouble on our hands with Russia and England and France. I don't know if you have Austria involved in this also. So I want to find out what happened, because even he would say like this, is it really true that the Jews murdered a French priest in order to use the blood to make matzah? Is that really true? And meanwhile, the Israeli Jews, if I can use this term, some Jews from Eretz Yisrael, especially Yisrael Beck, appeals to Mehmed Ali to stop the torture, and he stopped it. And a Jew came to Alexandria, and he used the old-fashioned way of begging and appealing and paying off somebody to get to the ruler and say like this, please stop the torture that's going on over there. His name was Yisrael Beck, which is the same name as my son-in-law now, because it's his grandfather. They go from Nissan Beck, what they call the Nissan Beck Shul. Now, meanwhile, word travels to Europe. Okay, it would. And in Paris, the French government backs Ratim Anton. You understand what I'm saying? The official French government in 1840 says the Jews killed this guy in order to cut him up, take the blood and use it for matzah. The French government. Rothschild, there was a Rothschild in Paris, James de Rothschild, and a very important person, as you might imagine. He goes to talk to the Prime Minister, Edouard Thiers. Thiers was a very famous Frenchman in the 19th century, famous a writer and a politician, a highly educated person. And he says, what the heck is going on over here? And Thiers says, listen, I didn't see a Jew like you do it in France. They're more civilized. But we all know in the Orient, they have a low level of culture. And probably over there, the Jews do kill. In other words, even a guy like I've been trying to tell you across the times, don't tell me somebody's modern, educated, all the rest of it. They observe it with the mother's milk. So even though he's a post-revolutionary guy and he's, as I say before, very westernized, I mean, for crying out loud, he's the prime minister of France, he totally buys into the idea that Jews, I didn't say all the Jews, not my friend, not my neighbor, not James Rothschild, but those Jews over there, it's totally possible and totally believable. And after all, they confessed. Now, and you say, so what kind of confession is torture? When you want to believe it, then you do like they say, Kofa knows how you emerge, and it's what you really believe. And so it was very disappointing. The French Jews cower, as has been the case until very recently. It's very interesting right now, as we speak. I know you follow the news, under all the relentless pressure of this Islamic demonstrations and attacking synagogue, the French Jews are going through a crisis of can they continue to cower or run away to Israel or fight. But at that time, they were very scared, except for one guy. And that was Adolphe Crémieux, who was a famous person of yesteryear. He was a French Jew, French. His family was from Avignon, from way back when. And very interesting person, super not religious. He was a leading proponent of reforming the Jewish religion in the 19th century. But was a Yiddish Yid. He became a very brilliant lawyer. And he, among other things, he fought for Jewish civil rights. Now, I want to tell you something. He also fought for black civil rights. He's the French Abraham Lincoln. He's the guy that got France to abolish the black slavery. Just you should know it. Because you hear Farrakhan and all these guys say the Jews are slavery. It's the opposite. You understand? But, and he, as I say, he fought when the other French Jews used to say, Shah, still don't make any noise. He fought against all the discrimination the Jews still suffered under French law. For example, they still kept the old Jewish oath, which says you had to swear in court. He says, I swear if I'm telling, it's like a mishapara, if I'm telling something falsely, then the fate of Korach should befall him, and he should drown like, I don't know, Pharaoh in the sea, and all these kind of very insulting, which a regular Frenchman didn't have to do, and he got rid of it. And he later on became a big minister in the government. If you look him up, you'll see he was basically the most famous French Jew of the 19th century. And so he was completely assimilated. But on the other hand, he was a Jewish Jew, and he's not going to stand for any monkey business. The Jews of Damascus, right, deserve justice, he says, not more, not less. This is before Zolo. You understand? Now, everybody said, I guess you're saying because you're a Jew, you're covering up for them. And he says, I am not, and I can prove it in court, so to speak. He's like a Dershowitz, he says, you want to do it? Make my day, let's go. And he got no traction in France because the government was more interested in believing it. And Thiers and the French government and the king of France at that time said, if our consul said it, we back him because France is loyal to its diplomats. They must be telling the truth because they're French, and so forth. Meanwhile, news got to London. And not only to Paris. With London, you weren't dealing with James Ross, you was Montefiore, so Moses Montefiore. This is when he was starting off his career for Klal Yisrael. Montefiore was born in Italy, but he ended up living most of his life in London, where he became a millionaire, multimillionaire. And he was the most famous Jew who was extremely orthodox. That is to say, he didn't know anything, but he was very punctilious in his observance, thanks to his wife. And was very highly admired in England. It's a very unusual story over here. And Montefiore was basically considered like, he was the address of the Jewish people. If Jews were in trouble somewhere, they would write to London to Montefiore. Say maybe he can do something about it. And he immediately goes to inform Palmerston, who is the foreign secretary. He's the Iron Man of the British government. Now, Palmerston and Montefiore are two very different types. One guy was a total playboy and all the rest of it, and Montefiore was the opposite, and yet they're very good friends. It's very interesting. I will even go so far to say that Palmerston profoundly admired Montefiore. It's the most unusual relationship that they had over there, and it was very good for the Jews. And I'll go even farther. Here you have this weird guy, Lord Palmerston, who stands at the head of the British Empire. And he had a lot of mishigassen. He often went against the stream, and he fought for unpopular causes. But on the other hand, he was very reactionary in many areas, and he switched parties, and the Queen couldn't stand him, and the Duke of Wellington couldn't stand him, and as I said before, he was unfaithful to everybody. He liked Jews. Go figure it out. It's part of his contrary nature. You understand? He liked Jews. I would even go so far as to say that starting with Palmerston, it's a straight line from Palmerston to the Balfour Declaration, if you know your British history. Yeah, he was the British statesman who said that's the right thing to help the Jews. And England, by the way, and England could do it. They could do whatever they wanted, you see. So he says it's the right thing to help the Jews. Look at the Old. I know we've got the New Testament. We should also look at the Old Testament. And from his time on, the British government was of great help to the Jews, particularly in Palestine and places like that under the Turks. Now's not the time to go into the details, but they helped them in a lot of different ways. And the British did it because they could. Now, I want you to understand. In London, the London Times and all the liberal press believed the blood libel. Get it? Just like today, you got CNN, you got the New York Times. You say, how can people who are educated come and believe all this malarkey? But they do, okay? Because it's not what you figure out analytically. You analyze what you feel in your guts. You apply your analytical, so they were anti-Semitic. That's a fact. And the only thing is like this. If there's a guy who couldn't give a darn about what the press says, it's Palmerston. This was his stock and trade. If the press is against me, good, I'll crush them. And that's very, very classic. And I can tell you, this is one of the most famous cases. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, Palmerston almost went to war. I mean, he was ready to go to war against Greece when they insulted a British Jew. There was a guy named David Pacifico, which is Shalom, who was from Gibraltar. Some of us are in Gibraltar. Gibraltar means you're a British subject, correct? You know that. Gibraltar's a little place, but if you're born there, you're a subject of the Queen. And he was a businessman, and he was in Athens. And, he was well-to-do. And in 1848, this is a little bit later, Rothschild from London visited Greece because the government wanted to negotiate a loan. And the government, in order to flatter us, it was in April, which was around Easter time. And so in Athens, they used to have big, reenactments of the crucifixion and so forth, like Mel Gibson, and especially the Judas play, which was very popular. Judas being a Jew who betrayed Christ for 20 pieces of silver. And the Greek government, in order to flatter Rothschild, because they want to get money out of this guy, so they said they're going to cancel the Judas play. And the Greek crowds, as we know today, you follow the news, they're very anti-Semitic, they all rioted, and they tore in the Jewish neighborhood, what else is new? And they burned down this guy's house with a lot of schreier and with a lot of merchandise, this Pacifico guy. And he wasn't taking it. And so he went to England, and he complained to British court. And he says, I got ripped up by the friend, and I'm suing Greece. Like you read now, some of these guys sued, Syria and Libya for what am I talking about, the airlines? Yeah, the airlines that were suing Iran. So he's the first guy who started it. And he won a judgment in British court. So many tens of thousands of pounds, I don't know. And Greece said, the heck with you. And Palmer said, the heck with Greece. He sent the British Navy there and they blockaded Athens. You understand? And Russia and France, you can look this up. Russia and France, so I guess you can't do this unilaterally, all the rest of it. This will lead to a war. Palmer says, I'm ready to go. And they backed off. And Greece paid. You understand? And when this happened, he was roundly assaulted in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords. How can you be so cavalier in your foreign policy to get England involved, especially over a Jew and over a Narishkeit and this and that and the other? And he gave a 5-hour speech. It's a very famous speech in British history. 5 hours, which Queen Victoria said, I guess, how did you have the vigor to speak straight without notes for 5 hours? And Disraeli said, how'd you not go to the bathroom for 5 hours? It's a famous story. So Palmerston ended by a famous reference to the New Testament, St. Paul, where, not that you should necessarily know your New Testament, but at one point St. Paul is arrested by the Roman police. But he wasn't just a Jew, he happened to be a Roman citizen. And if you're a Roman citizen, it's habeas corpus. You can't get arrested stamazoi. Right? It's just like you have to read you your rights, and you get a right to an attorney, all the way. They had that in Rome. And so it's very famous that when St. Paul said, Civis Romanus sum, I am a citizen of Rome, he was entitled to all the protection of law. So I say, as the Roman days of old, as the Roman in the days of old held himself free from indignity when he could say Chibas Ramanasum, a British subject, in whatever land he may be, shall feel confident that the watchful eye and the strong arm of England will protect him from injustice and wrong. And the whole House of Commons went down, and he won, and he said to the Sunday Times, you know? And he was the hero of all the pubs. You understand? There's cartoons of this and sort of. So he was quite a guy, and he was ready to go to war over a Jew. So I'm trying to tell you, as they fingers oats. And so basically, I'll tell you one thing: the whole world felt that the Jews did it because they wanted to, and the whole world felt that the Jews are guilty, and the torture merely got them to say what they wanted to really say, except Palmerston. It's very interesting. And Moses Montefiore went to him. They had as I said before, a very interesting relation. I got to share this with you. There's Moses Montefiore, among other things, was super rich, and therefore he was the head of the British Board of Deputies and that sort of thing, all the leading official British Jewish bodies, as they were at that time. And the British Jews did not have civil rights. They had toleration, but they didn't get full civil rights until a little bit later. And that's when Reform Judaism started in England, very small. And the law that had been written in England long before in the 1700s in Parliament was that the chief rabbi is in charge of a chuppah kedushin. That you can't get married, like in Israel, you can't get married unless it's solemnized by the chief rabbi or one of his delegated rabbis, and you can't get divorced unless same way, unless delegated by the rabbis. The Reform said we want to do our own marriages and divorces and things like that. And Montefiore said, no, the law forbids it. And so there was an agitation already in the 1830s to change the law to make it fit to the new reality that there's Orthodox Judaism and Reform Judaism. And Montefiore said no, and he lobbied and all that used his power, they shouldn't have it. And Palmerston, at that particular point with the prime minister, he said, what's going on? We got, you're bringing the whole England to Jewish politics into the board meeting, And Palmerston called the Reform and the Orthodox, Montefiore and David Wolfe Marx. That's the next one. The guy at the bottom was the head of Reform, into the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. Like Obama, he said, can't you guys make peace or something like that? Obama and Montefiore said, no. You understand? And Palmerston, who liked him, is famous. He said, the meeting took place where Palmerston asked Sir Moses why he objected to certify the new congregation. It's not Orthodox, said Montefiore. Whereupon Lord Palmerston said, Sir Moses, we cannot maintain orthodoxy in the Church of England. Why should you expect to be able to do so in the synagogue? And so he reasoned about finally, Montefiore, much against his will, kind of gave in. But that was the kind of relationship that they had. So, which, by the way, was Minashemite. That was a good thing. It was a good thing because the poor schnooks in Damascus had nobody on their side. This you have to keep in mind as we go through tonight. Montefiore asked Palmerston to back him up. He said, I want justice done for my people. And Palmerston says, I will do so. And he writes official letters to all the British consuls and ambassadors and admirals in the Near East. You back up Montefiore. Okay? Now, it's very famous. Therefore, Montefiore put together a whole expedition. He went with his wife, the very famous Lady Judith Montefiore, right? Who was a very famous person. I cannot forbear. If you want to know who she is, I'm going to tell you a story which is very famous, but you just never heard of it. And because it's Tisha B'Av, it's particularly appropriate because Tisha B'Av 2 days away. And the guy on the right is Admiral Sidney Smith. He's number 2 to Nelson. Nelson is the foremost British naval hero, and this guy was number 2. That's pretty good. Okay? Nelson got killed at Battle of Trafalgar. Sidney Smith didn't get killed. He won a whole bunch of naval victories. He was a big deal and a famous person once upon a time. Her father, Judith Montefiore, I'll tell you about him, his name was Levi Baron Cohn. And he was a well-to-do British Jew who got the Navy contracts. Let's put it that way. He got the Navy contracts. And so admirals and naval officials used to go in and out of their house on business. Now came Tisha B'Av, happens to be, like now, this time of the year. And Judith Montefiore, from her young age, very, very frum, just as naturally. That's what her predisposition was. And she wrote later on, she said once, when the fast, I'm going to read you what she describes over there. On the fast day for the destruction of Jerusalem, we were sitting, me and my sisters, as is customary, in mourning attire on low stools, reading the Lamentations of Jeremiah. That they were millionaires, so they lived in a mansion, but it's Tisha B'Av, and just the ladies, and they don't go to shul, so in the house, they sat down in a little stool, and what do they go do in Tisha B'Av? Suddenly, the servant entered the room, closely followed by Admiral Sir Sidney Smith and several other gentlemen. So, you're sitting there with socks and, in sitting Shiva. It was embarrassing. My sisters became somewhat embarrassed, not liking to be thus surprised in our peculiar position. But I quietly kept my seat, and when Sir Sidney Smith asked the reason for being seated so low, I replied, "This is the anniversary of the destruction of Jerusalem, which is kept by conforming Jews, Orthodox Jews, as a day of mourning and humiliation. The valor exhibited by our ancestors on this occasion, sad occasion, is no doubt well known to you," because you probably read Josephus. "Sir Sidney and the other gentlemen present," and she said that to you and Sir Sidney and the other gentlemen, "and I feel sure," she said, "you will understand our grief that it was unavailing to save the holy city and the temple." Now, even though our ancestors were brave and fought bravely, it didn't work. "But we treasure the memory of it as a bright example to ourselves and to following generations, how to fight and sacrifice our lives for the land in which we were born and which gives us shelter and protection." And this is remarkable to read this right now in the middle of the Gaza campaign on Erev Tisha B'Av. And she said it like this: "Sir Sidney Smith and the other gentlemen," she said, "appeared to be much pleased with the explanation I gave them. They observed it was a most noble feeling which prompts the true patriot to mourn for the brave who have fallen on the field of battle for their country, and to the memory of the struggles of the Jews of Palestine to remain the rightful masters of the land, which God apportioned to them as an inheritance, would ever remain not only in the heart of every brave man in the British realm, but also in every right-thinking man in all other parts of the world as a glorious monument of their dauntless valor and fervent devotion to a good and holy cause." Yeah, I wish he was in charge of the BBC today. Huh? And I'll tell you again, you can Google him, he's a very famous British admiral. So that's who Mrs. Montefiore was when she was young. So you can imagine that if they didn't have any children, and by the time they were in middle age, they realized they're not going to have any children, and they had money, beyond what they'll ever need, and so they devoted the rest of their lives. He lived to be 100. She died before that. To he said, Klal Yisrael. You understand? They could afford to do it, and so wherever Jews were in trouble, he made his business to go try to help them. And on a number of occasions he was successful, and on a number of occasions he was not successful, and this made him a hero throughout the Jewish world. It's well known, if you went to Russia 100 years ago, before the First World War, especially in the Misnagdig, the non-Hasidic areas, they said, it's very famous, they said there used to be in a regular Jewish home, there's always 3 pictures on the wall. The Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Yochanan the Spectre, the Kovner of, and Montefiore. You see, folk heroes. And this is why, okay? This is why. Now, I got to tell you this story simply because it's a good story. And I heard this many years ago from somebody. Her father was Levi Baron Cohn. That name won't mean anything to you, but if you're a very, very close student of the Shalos and Shuvas Noda B'Yehuda, it will be. He's the guy to ask the umbrella question. Okay? How do you know you can't use an umbrella on Shabbos? Doesn't say so in the Talmud, right? Doesn't say so in the Shulchan Aruch. The answer is it's in the responsa of Cheskel and Noda B'Yehuda. And if you look there, you'll see that there was a certain guy named Levi Baron Cohn who was from Amsterdam, who moved to London around 1770, 1780, thereabouts, something like that. And the Jews in London were notoriously lax in halachic observance. And the old question, the old line, as a matter of fact, the shalos is treif, don't even ask whether you can do it in London, it's always raining. And so everybody said, of course you can take umbrella. Why not? And what are you doing? You're not lighting a match, What's wrong with that? And this guy showed up, and he was from Amsterdam, he was more religious, all the rest. He said, how do you know you can do an umbrella? Maybe it's something on Shabbos. And they just shut up. Well, he wrote a letter, a shaila, to the leading rabbi at that time, when asking buddy, it was Ezekiel Land of Prague, the Noda B'Yehuda, who was a very famous and very authoritative type of person. And he wrote back a whole famous response in which says, no, you can't do it for various reasons, right? Whether the umbrella's open or even when the umbrella's closed. And, oh boy, all hell broke loose because the whole community was angry at him. Who asked you? Why don't you go to the local rabbi? Who does this? You frumak, you nut, you make everybody's life miserable. You're a real jerk and all the rest of it. And they ostracized him. And he wrote to the Navi, the story, he wrote to the Navi, he says, what'd you do to me? You get me messed up over here, and, my business is going bad because nobody wants to do business with me, and my daughters are a few years away from getting married, from they're teenagers, nobody's going to go, they're going to have shidduchim problems and all the rest of it. And there was no answer. But a number of years went by, and the French Revolution broke out, 1789. At which point, the British quadrupled their navy because of a fleet, and then they needed somebody to supply the navy contract. He got the contracts. In which case, zillionaire, right? If you're supplying the British Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, that's the contract you want, Well, I mean, for sales and for cannon and for especially food and things like that, ships got to run on something, doesn't it? I remember the British had something like 800, 900 ships. It was crazy, the number at that time. But Shidduchim, he had a real problem because nobody wanted to go with the girls because the father's crazy from. You understand? And so what do you do? And the girls were complaining, and it's a famous. The girls are complaining what's going to happen, this and that, and the other. The ripe old age of 17, 18. We're going to die, 19, 20, and so he did the classic thing. He said, "You won't marry a local boy to marry a greener, a refugee." He said, that's an old Jewish, tactic. You marry somebody who just landed off the boat. They don't know better. They didn't bring the local prejudices. So she married this guy who couldn't speak English very well. Just got off the boat from Germany and saw the rest of it. Nathan Meyer Rothschild. So that's one. But that was Hannah, the older one. She was religious, but not super crazy religious like the sister I just read you, Judith, who was really, from as you see with the way, Sidney Smith. And then they say, who's going to marry her? He had four brothers. But she said, she's too frum for them. They're Orthodox, but they're not that Orthodox, She's too frum for them. And what are you going to do? So she ended up having the same thing. She had to marry another greenhorn, Italienische. A guy moved from Livorno, Montefiore. So the guy ended up marrying, one daughter married Rothschild, the other married Montefiore. Is billionaires by the standards of today. When you had £1 million, you know what that was in those days compared to now? It's like a billions. So Montefiore, when he went on his missions, in this one, 1840, he brought his wife. That's bringing very heavy artillery. Let's put it that way, in the Jewish sense. Now, Adolf Kremio, in Paris, even though his government wouldn't support him, even the whole country's against him, he said, "I'm putting together a French delegation, and we're going to go there to argue like Emile Zola. We're going to fight against this injustice on its merits, and I'm not scared of anybody." And neither of them spoke Arabic and Turkish, so Montefiore brought his interpreter, and Kremio brought his interpreter. Solomon Munk, who was actually Shiva guy, spoke like 15 languages. Was a very famous scholar. He was in the Académie de France. And so he's the guy who, by the way, found the original copy of the Moreh Nevuchim, if that means anything. And Montefiore had his rabbi, Louis Lowe, who spoke 37 languages. This is the truth. Okay, he was from Pressburg Yeshiva and all the rest of it, but he needed a job. He ended up with Montefiore. He was his local rabbi. He went with him on all the trips. So between the two of them, they had the whole Middle East covered. And they went over there. They landed in Egypt, of course. Now Montefiore landed on a British battleship. Kremio came on a French ship. They were greeted like saviors, you can imagine. The Jews in the Middle East were terrified that what happened in Damascus shouldn't spread. It's very easy, a drop of a hat. It could spread elsewhere. And what's going to happen in Egypt, and what's going to happen in Palestine, and all the rest of it. And Montefiore was particularly popular because he was religious. They always knew that. When he came to the shul, and his wife used to go up to the ladies section in Cairo and in Alexandria, and she was to the Jews, she was like a queen. You understand? They used to run to kiss her hand. It was like a big deal. And here comes the best part. Mehmet Ali, the ruler of Egypt, was saying like this: what is going on over here? Why is Palmerston sending a Jew with a battleship to talk to me about it? Can't be, but this is the Middle East conspiracy theories. You understand? This can't be because Palmerston actually gives a darn about a couple of stupid Jews who were beat up in Damascus. It's got to be. This is a British plot to displace the French and outfox the Russians, to take over Egypt and knock me out, and then put my son in. No, not my son, my second son, too soon against Ibrahim, and then put the Turks back in. And he concocted a whole bunch of business over here, And every time Montefiore said, no, this is on the up and up. This the British government expressing humanitarian sympathies. That doubled and tripled, for the Egyptian government. They couldn't believe it. You understand? So they got scared out of their minds. There's all some kind of huge British plot. Now, they weren't totally crazy. 40 years later, England did seize Egypt. Not in Palmerston's time, but in 1880, 1882, the British did grab Egypt. You understand? And a few years before that, the Israeli grabbed the Suez Canal. So it wasn't totally crazy, just on this occasion it was. You understand? So Montefiore came backed by a lot of, the appearance of power, even if he didn't exactly have the substance of it. The delegation requested, and by the way, the two Jews didn't get along at all. I mean, I don't want to go into this, but he's a French Jew, he's an English Jew. Kremio kept saying, let me do the talking. And Montefiore says, you're a Frenchman, you don't count for anything. He was like a Jewish Palmerston. He says, just stay out of the way. The delegation requested that the investigation should be abandoned by the Damascus authorities and be transferred to Egypt, to Alexandria, for judicial clarification, or that the case be judged by European judges. Let's put it this way. Let's try them without torture. How about that? Is that a radical notion? How about that? This request was not granted, as war was imminent between Egypt and Turkey. This is all happening in the middle 1840s, when the war did break out between Nehmet Ali and others, and the British Navy ended up bombarding Akko on behalf of Turkey against Egypt. I'm not even going to go into greater details than that. It's incredibly complicated. It's Charles Napier and all this stuff. Both Mehmet Ali and the French wished to prevent an investigation into the events in Damascus because it'll reflect badly on Egyptian administration and it'll play in the hands of Palmerston, who wants to say that the Egyptians should get out of Syria and Palestine and put the Turks back in because the Turks will be more fair in their judicial approach. So therefore, it's all a plot. The Jews, whose first concern was the release of their co-religionists, decided to accept the simple liberation of the prisoners without a judicial declaration of innocence. So basically, Mehmet Ali said, I guess, you worried about the 50 Jews? Here, pardon, go. Get out of here. And Montefiore actually was very biffed. He said, what do you mean pardon? Pardon means they did it. You know what I'm saying? Pardon means they did it. And he had Lowe, his interpreter, said, read it exactly. And in the end, it was explicitly stated the liberation was an act of justice and not merely a favor granted by the ruler. But Montefiore said this, and people aren't going to look at that. They say a pardon means you did it. You understand? The liberation order was issued on August 28th, and the prisoners who were still alive in Damascus were saved. Montefiore was very bitter, and he said, I don't want to take a pardon. But Adolf Kremio correctly said like this, he says, you can't be like that. There are people suffering. Get them out of there. You understand? No, just get Pollard out of jail, then worry about it. You can't do that. And he wasn't wrong. So Montefiore accepted it. Determined, however, to drive a stake through the heart of the blood libel, Montefiore himself sails to Istanbul with his wife and Louis Lowe. There's a new sultan there. The old guy died in 1839. 16 years old, Abdulmajid, who's desperate for British support. After all, he's fighting against Mehmet Ali, and he's got the Russians on the other side. Also, he has his conspiracy theories. Why is Palmerston sending a British guy, a Jew, to Istanbul for something to happen in Syria? This must be a British plot to detach Syria from the Ottoman Empire and give it to, all the rest of it. The fertile imagination of the Orient was in full steam, okay, which helped Montefiore. And look, it was the Middle East, And so after initial difficulties, Montefiore secures a firman, a decree from the Sultan, officially stating that the blood libel is false, prohibiting making it a charge in the future, and clearly implying, that Damascus prisoners were innocent. So he didn't get a declaration they're innocent, but look what he said. He said, for the love we bear for our subjects who permit the Jewish nations, the innocence of the crime against them is evident, to be worried about and tormented the consequence of accusations which have not the least foundation in the truth. So that's in effect saying that whoever was arrested and tortured in Damascus, it was false. Okay? That's what it says in effect, and that's as good as you were possibly going to get. Now, if you followed me 2 lectures ago, Suleiman the Magnificent issued the same declaration back in the 1500s. Didn't stop this from happening. This is the trouble in Jewish history. You go, and you work, and you get your declaration, all the rest of it, but an hour later or a year later, it's not worth anything. You want a sad example? You had a ceasefire back on Friday, and a minute later it wasn't worth anything in Gaza. You know that. This is the Middle East. This is what you're dealing with. Montefiore returns in triumph to London. Right? He was received by Palmerston in Downing Street, and he became like a god, all the rest of it. And I can tell you right now that you want to see the difference. The French government backed Retimonton, their guy. His version gets out too. The confessions were circulating widely. Of course, they omitted the part that it was taken by torture, but they were circulated widely, and they're quoted in the right wing and the ultramontane press. And plenty believe that the Jews did it, but they used their money to suppress the truth. What happened? A bunch of Jews got caught killing somebody from Matzah in Damascus. The big Jews got scared. They sent Montefiore with the endless pocketbook, and he bribed everybody. And he forced Mehmet Ali and the Sultan of Turkey to issue, but it's not really true. a wave of anti-Semitism sweeps Western Europe after the triumph of Montefiore. The London Times, right? Let alone the British, the French, the German press, all that. You can just imagine what happened. Which means, God bless Palmerston. He was the only guy who stood against this. And I can tell you right now, the British consul in Damascus supported the French. He said the Jews did it. You understand? The Jews did it, and Palmerston fired him. You understand? And he said, what did I do wrong? He says, you abused a metaphor. Because he said, Montefiore dropped his heavy money bags or something like that in Alexandria. He said, you abused the metaphor, you're fired. You understand? So this it's quite a business. And I can tell you right now, the Jews of Damascus who were saved, they made a Kiddush cup, a becher, a goblet, and very, how they do in Damascus, very, very finely wrought, and all the rest of it. And look what it said there, in Hebrew and English. Right? Who was our friend when the world was our foe? So it's a funny world we live in. You understand? It's a good thing they had this guy over there, because otherwise the history books will all say like this: the Jews did it. Go figure. Now, the Arab world regularly, now I'm going to switch to the present time, unfortunately. The Arab world regularly refers to the Damascus Confessions even today. The story I just told you is very well known in the Arab world, except with the Rati Monton version, obviously. The Jews who did it, and they're guilty. Okay? And they just used their money to suppress the truth. There's a book, which is very popular, written by Old Man Assad's number 2. Now we're dealing with Assad Jr., but there was Assad Sr., the guy that wiped out Hamas, I should say. I wish he wiped out Hamas. He says, in other words, the big massacre guy who nobody said anything about. Hafiz al-Assad, who was the dictator and president, if you want to call it that, of Syria from 1970 to 2000 when he died. So his number 2 guy was the defense minister, Mustafa Tlass, who unfortunately is still alive. And among other things, and he's a real jerk, and among other things, he published a whole book called The Matzah of Zion. Let me just read you a piece of it. In 1983, and I just got this offline, this is so easy, unfortunately. Tlass wrote and published a book called The Matzah of Zion, which is a treatment of the Damascus affair of 1840. After all, Syria capital is Damascus today, you see. It repeats the ancient blood libel that the Jews used the blood of murdered non-Jews in religious ritual, such as baking matzah bread. In this book, he argues that the true religious beliefs of the Jews are, quote, black hatred against all humans and religions, unquote, and that no Arab country should ever sign a peace treaty with Israel. Tlass reprinted the book several times and stands by its conclusions. This is a guy whose hands are dripping with the blood of Syrians, Following the book's publication, he told Der Spiegel, which is the famous German magazine, that the accusation against the Jews was valid, and his book is a historical study based on documents from France, Vienna, and the American University in Beirut. That's true, except they're the documents of the protocols of the interrogation. They just leave out the part, at this point we beat the heck out of the guy, but now he said this and this and this. Regarding the book, Tlass has stated, I intend, through publication of the book, to throw light on some secrets of the Jewish religion based on the conduct of the Jews and their fanaticism, and both Eastern and Western civilizations through Jews in the ghettos, only after recognizing their destructive badness. He also claimed that since 1840, every mother warned her child, do not go far from home, the Jew may come by and put you in a sack to kill you and suck your blood for the Matzah of Zion. In 1991, the book was translated into English. Thanks a lot. Egyptian producer Munir Radi subsequently decided it was an ideal Arab answer to Schindler's List, and later announced plans to produce a film adaptation of Matzah of Zion, which is online. The book also reported served a scientific basis for renewal of the blood libel charge in international forums in 2001. No, it was the United Nations forums. Al-Ahram, which is the leading the New York Times of Egypt, Al-Ahram published an article called "A Jewish Matzah Made from Arab Blood." I repeat, "A Jewish Matzah Made from Arab Blood," which summarized the Matzah of Zion book, concluding that the bestial drive to knead, K-N-E-A-D, Passover matzah with the blood of non-Jews confirmed in the records of the Palestinian police, where there are many recorded cases of bodies of Arab children who disappeared being found torn to pieces without a single drop of blood. So you notice, this is the lie machine working out. Back in Palestine, before 1948, when the Palestinians and Jews were living there, every once in a while a kid would disappear, and when you would find the body, it was empty of blood. So what happened? Oh, now we know. You see? The most reasonable explanation is the blood was taken to be kneaded into the dough of extremist Jews to use their matzahs to be devoured during Passover. This is at the New York Times of Egypt. This is repeated in United Nations forums. This is repeated in the General Assembly of the United Nations. And we don't live in a time when somebody says, oh, what you say is beyond, it's over the top, it's unacceptable, and all that kind of liberal sort of talk that we use to suppress speech doesn't work because the Arabs won't listen to any of that. And so they continually spread it all around. And by the way, this class is a behemoth. Look at this, read it. Can you can't? I can't see. So, Katz is also boasted in National Assembly, that's the parliament of Syria, atrocities committed against Israeli soldiers, that's POWs, fell captive in the Yom Kippur War. I gave the Medal of the Republic hero to a soldier who happened to kill 29 Jews. He did not use the military weapon to kill them, but he used the axe to chop their head off. He then devoured the neck of one of them and ate in front of the people. I'm proud of his courage and bravery. He actually killed himself, for he actually killed by himself 20 Jews by count and crush. Now, by the way, you notice that he sucked the blood out of them. You understand that that's, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure this one out. But it doesn't matter. Facts get in the way of the narrative, right? Now, there is one good thing about Klaus. He referred to Arafat very effectively. There's no love lost among them. He's not the son of one, he's the son of 60,000, which is quite a deal. Now, the Arabic world, the Islamic world, eats this stuff up, and it's become a basic component of Arab culture. Hear what I just said? A basic component of Arab culture. That's not a phrase I just tossed out. Consider what I just said. In America, the Gettysburg Address is a basic component of American culture. You know what I'm saying? The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and a couple other things like that are basic components of American culture. I'm even willing to be popularistic and say Coca-Cola is a basic culture. What's a basic part of Arab culture? The Jews steal babies, they, puncture them, take out the blood and use it for matzah. Right? That's a basic feat. No, this is not the protocols of Zion. That's something different. That's another beat. That's not what I'm talking about. Right? Let's watch out for the mixing of the categories over here. Get your libel straight. Right? No. I'm serious. No, but understand what I'm simply trying to educate you a little bit. Listen, it's the week of Tisha B'Av, so this is not fun stuff. But when else can you talk about this except in the 9 days? When Israel deals with the Arab world, with the Muslim world, you just have to understand what these other people believe. When they look at Jews, especially the younger generation who've grown up that they're just brainwashed in this, but you don't even have to be a younger generation. In the 1840, Adolphe Thiers, who was the Prime Minister of France, the London Times believed in this sort of thing, So, Kal v'chomer, if you're just a regular Muslim growing up in the Muslim world, this is taken as a fact. Excuse me, okay? So they eat this stuff up. After all, it happened in an Arab city, the Damascus affair. It's not some tale from William of Norwich or Simon of Trent, all the way out in Europe, or the Cadoche Blois that we speak about in medieval France. Happened in Damascus, right? It was a Christian who was killed, but it happened in Damascus. And the Jews did confess. As for the torture, this is denied or regarded as irrelevant. Now I'm going to show you something very disturbing, but you should just know it. And I'm sorry, all I had to do was go on Google and say like this: Jews, blood libel, Arabic, or something like that. And look, let's see if it works. بدنا دم طفل مسيحي قبل الفصح مشان الفطير. نادان رجالي. لا تخاف حبيبي لا تخاف. This is instead of, I don't know, the TV shows, Saturday Night Live or something like that. But this was popular stuff over there. And this is a tiny piece of a long series. You can tell that, right? If you really care, which I'm sure most of you don't, you can take the trouble and find the whole series online. It's a long, involved sort of thing with English subtitles. What son of a gun put that one in? Okay? And it's not considered weird or a horror show or like a Dracula. It's taken as a basic fact. This is who the Jews are. You understand? So the Damascus Fair is still with us today. The Arabs and the Muslims will never pay close attention to what I'm about to say. They will not stop ever repeating it. Okay? And so look at this. As you know, President Obama, as some other president recently, goes to the Pesach Seder every year. To you and me, it's innocuous. You know, you go to Chinese New Year, you go to this, you go to Italian Day, and he's got Jews on the staff, as we all know. Nothing wrong with that. They have their, I don't know when they have to say it, it's not on the Seder or not, but, you know, they go to Passover Seder, and after all, with Obama and others, you can make it the holiday of freedom and all that kind of stuff. So what's the big deal? Oh my God, the Arabs see this, and Obama eating matzah. Get it? I'm trying to show you, get out of your little thing in Baltimore and put in the glasses of the majority of the people of the world, I'm sorry to say, or a significant portion of them, and they're going to see something else. And what do you see over here? Read it, right? You can't see it. It says, in May of last year, at the Middle East Media Research Institute revealed an Egyptian politician, Khalid something, can't see it, said the following during television interview. It's well known during Passover, they take the matzahs called the blood of Zion, and they take a Christian child, slit his throat, and slaughter him, and they never forego this right. He said this when he saw the picture of Obama. You understand? It's on Egyptian TV. In addition, the website belonging to a Palestinian organization, which is started by Hanan Ashrawi. Okay, which, by the way, the New York Times, I just happened to throw this in. If you care to, you can now go. I mean this. You can go. Ari showed it to me. So you can go on a New York Times sponsored trip in the Middle East, especially Israel and Palestine. New York Times. And the scholar in residence is not Rabbi Friend, it's Hanan Ashrawi. Okay? No, because they want to give you a balanced picture. You understand? They want to give you a balanced picture. So he says, Hanan Ashrawi published an article in March 2013 criticizing Barack Obama for holding a Passover Seder, saying, does Obama in fact know the relationship, for example, between Passover and Christian blood, or Passover and Jewish blood rituals? This is last year, mind you, in Pesach, 2 Pesachs ago. Furthermore, much of the chatter and gossip about historical blood rituals are real and not fake as they claim. The Jews use the blood of Christians in the Jewish Passover. So I tell you again, you see somebody going to a Pesach Seder, it's like innocuous. As we all know, in America, the Pesach Seder is the most widely kept Jewish ritual, and it's also the one, for better or worse, which has the largest number of non-Jewish participation. There's a ton of people who have relatives, friends, this, that, and the other, at a Pesach Seder. After all, like it's for freedom, whatever you want to do. A lot of people find the story of the Exodus very gripping. It'll be less so as time goes on if the Arabs get their way. Right? They'll say, like, where'd you buy the matzah? You say, I puppet a puppet, so who's that? Right? Like, it is what it is. And just tell them shmur matzah, that's all they need to hear. So the blood libel is being spread virally as we speak. It will be part of the world in which our children and grandchildren grow up, unfortunately. That means that we will have to familiarize ourselves with the information I've shared with you over the course of this lecture series, incomplete as it is, because I'm sorry to say that, look, I'm just talking about one, the Damascus affair tonight, and my time is soon up. There's the Tisas affair, and the Hilton affair, and this and that and the other. There's all kind of famous stories. It's too much. Right? It's too much. They will have to come to terms with the fact that every time one of these accusations is made, it gets traction. There's a famous case that I'm not going to talk about, the Tisa Eslar affair, in which in 1880s in Hungary, they accused the Jews of killing this Christian girl, all the rest of it. It's a long, very involved story, and they confessed, and one of the Jews said he did it even, and all the rest. And eventually they found the body 3/4 decomposed, which had no holes in it, And that's what dismissed the case. But not really. A Hungarian journalist in 1966 under the communists visited that town of Tisa Eslar. That's 80 years later, and he said he still got a lot of bad feelings about the Jews there. In other words, they did it. This is the nature of it. You put it out there, and it gets traction. Maybe among everybody, but it'll always get among somebody. The silver lining in the cloud, perhaps, and with this I'll conclude, ironically, is a famous essay of Achad Ha'am, the famous Zionist Maskilic intellectual, person very anti-frum, as we would say today, all the rest of it. But and as a matter of fact, the founder of modern cultural Zionism, of secular and atheist Judaism. But he was a very good writer, and one of his most famous essays is called Chatzi Nechama, Porta, which is translated as a little consolation. Not a lot of consolation, a little consolation. He wrote this in the 1890s, right? And what he said was like this, and this is good to know, particularly today, when all the news is against us, So any normal person reads the news, Israel's terrible. After all, can everybody be wrong? The New York Times, the Baltimore Sun, the CNN, the British, the Europeans, the Asians, everybody says, only the Jews say that. Can they all be wrong? And he called Nechama Portugal, he's like this. The average Jew growing up today, you hear all this stuff, you believe it. After all, as I said before, you sound, this definition of insane. If I say I'm the only normal person in the room, you're all crazy. What does that mean? Right? Now, but then we have a shtickle Nechama. Why? Because he says, and he wrote this in the 1890s, he said, you look at the blood libel, what that time was raging in Russia. We know this is totally baloney. It's a cock and bull story. There's nothing to it, zero. And the whole world believes it. So you see, it is possible to say, I'm right, the whole world is wrong, and you're actually right. So we have to be able to take, as I said before, a certain reassurance from the constant survival of these absolute lies. As I say, listen, we're not talking about a question whether somebody cheated somebody else now, or somebody that, you're talking about taking a child and poking them and getting out blood and baking matzah with them. That's just a total fantasy, right? So how can so many people believe it? The olam is a golem, the masses are asses, the public is it, and you as a Jew get used to the fact that it's totally possible that the whole world is full of it, and you're right. And he wrote this not from a religious perspective. It is possible. Blood libel proves it so. He even says that if it continues, just listen to this. He's writing this about Jewish self-doubt and blood libels, things in the 1890s, when at that time the Russian Jewish intellectuals, I repeat, the Russian Jewish intellectuals, were all wondering. There's so much anti-Semitic remarks about the Jews, about how bad they are in so many ways, and we have our faults. And they suck it in and become very self-destructive, become a self-hating Jew. And so he writes like this. He says, this state of things, if it continues, can do us great mortal harm. There is nothing more dangerous for a nation or for an individual than to plead guilty to imaginary sins. When the sin is real, there's opportunity for repentance. By honest endeavor, the sinner may purify himself. But when a man has been persuaded to suspect himself unjustly, how can he rid his consciousness of guilt? Remove the beam from your eye, they tell us. And they would obey, but they cannot because the beam's not there. See, it's the position of a monomaniac who for some reason has come to believe that a heavy weight is hanging from his nose that cannot be removed. And so the people, for example, and there's too many of them, Jews, I'm talking about Jews, who say Israel's a moral monster, we're the criminals in Gaza, you know what I'm talking about, and it's all our fault, and the Jews are Nazis, and worse, and the whole Israel, that whole business. How many young people get taken in? A ton, right? And it's, besides everything, it's unhealthy, because how are you ever going to get out of it? They'll never be, since they're doing something imaginary, they can never be brought to see the truth. You understand? They cannot be sought the truth. If they think that Israel's a moral monster, they're going to spend the rest of their life going, mea culpa for the Jews because they're moral monsters. And it's chimerical. I mean, it doesn't really exist. Hence, we end up with what Lenin called the useful idiots, which you see them in all the demonstrations. It's Jews. I understand there were a bunch in Baltimore, but they're certainly all over the world. Sometimes the useful idiots are the Torah Karta guys, the extreme went to Ahmadinejad and all that. People don't like to say it. Sometimes it's Satmar, it's useful idiots. And they think they're doing well. They are what you call Palgin and Dibura in Talmudic talk. They say, well, the blood libel is not true, but Israel is a monster. That part's true. You see? What's the result? Just what Achanan was talking about. You end up where Jews have a self-hate, and they have to go the extra mile to justify the hate. And we find the worst enemies come out of your own ranks. So the only look, I wish I could say that the truth will set you free. When you know the facts, it'll change it. But they don't agree to the facts. That's what I just told you. They won't see it the way I just described it over here. They'll say I'm twisting it. And when I say, what about the tortures, all the rest of it, they'll finagle a way out of it, because there's no such thing as proving truth through argument. All you have to do is get a better arguer. I'm not the best arguer. You get somebody smarter than me, and they'll out-argue it. And that's where the world is standing today. So I end this series, just before Tisha B'Av, on a sober note. And, what we did in the past, we talked about the Crusades and Mechem El-Nissi. That happened long ago. When it comes to something like the Aliyah down the Bible, it did happen long ago, but it also happened today. And unfortunately, it's around till tomorrow, we have to take the little that I gave you and now do a little bit of work on your own and educate your children and others about it, so that when they're confronted by this, and I'm sorry to say that they will be confronted by this in one place or another, they'll be able to answer back. Otherwise, the average person wouldn't be able to tell you something as basic as what I just said. Imagine in Baltimore or New York or London or South Africa, somebody go up to the street and say like this: I have here the confession the Jews made to the prosecutor in Damascus in 1840. And they don't know it was under a bastinado and a torture. They don't know they took their kids and tortured them in front of their eyes. Because that part you leave out, you see? So if you don't take the trouble to familiarize yourself with the totality of the facts, you're always going to be paying the price for ignorance, and you cannot be Jewish today as an ignorant person. That we see all around us. And on that note, I close, and we shall all have an easy fast. Well, Dovid and Marv in 2-3 minutes, like we did the other time, in the other room.
Maybe do that on Tishma too? I get it. Stitching on Tishma.
I thought about being silver
You'll be in silver screen. Right, what's in silver screen? What's in the green? They're going to tomorrow night.
No, there were cases where... Right, that's true. You want to know why?